Tobias Royce, the quiet and calculating son of legendary police chief Leonard Royce, built a $135 million drug empire right under his father's nose, while the man who once cleaned up Britain's streets unknowingly became the cover for its deadliest criminal network. Leonard Royce was once hailed as a hero, a decorated chief superintendent of Greater Manchester Police. He built his career cracking down on gangs, shutting down drug labs, and bringing feared criminals to justice. For over 3 decades, he maintained an image of honor, strength, and zero tolerance for crime. His colleagues respected him, the public admired him, and the government rewarded him with medals and early retirement. But behind the headlines and applause, his greatest personal challenge wasn't a mob boss or a drug cartel. It was his only child, Tobias Royce. Tobias was raised in privilege, but never peace. He lived under the weight of his father's shadow and reputation. His life was defined by expectations he never chose and rules he never respected. At school, he was intelligent but defiant. Teachers described him as magnetic, even dangerous. While other children played games, Tobias studied people. He learned how to read faces, twist words, and charm his way out of trouble. Leonard, a man of structure and law, hoped his son would follow his path into public service. But Tobias had other plans. He wasn't interested in badges or justice. He wanted control. At 17, Tobias began vanishing for days. Leonard blamed bad friends, but it went deeper. Tobias was making connections, low-level runners, nightclub promoters, and petty dealers. He would offer favors, promise protection, and gather information. It wasn't about money back then. It was about building influence and testing boundaries. Whenever he was caught or questioned, he used his father's name like a shield. And it worked. No one wanted to cross the son of the city's most respected cop. By 18, Tobias disappeared completely. Leonard told friends and neighbors his son had gone to Spain for college. In truth, Tobias had booked a one-way flight to Malaga using a fake name and a borrowed ID. There, he slipped into the underworld like water through cracks. He spent 2 years moving between cities, Marbella, Barcelona, Valencia, offering courier services and laundering small cash bundles. He was quiet, clever, and observant. And he listened more than he spoke. By the time he turned 20, he had earned the trust of people who didn't trust anyone. Unlike impulsive criminals chasing fast cars and women, Tobias played the long game. He didn't draw attention. He lived modestly, kept notes, and learned logistics. While others fought over corners, he studied port schedules, customs routines, and border patrol weaknesses. He understood that controlling the supply line, not the streets, was where the real power lived. His ambition was surgical, and his emotions were buried beneath layers of strategy. When he returned to the UK at 22, it wasn't as a lost boy coming home. It was as a ghost with a mission. Tobias reappeared with polished manners and forged paperwork. He rented a showroom space in Manchester and launched Velvet Motors, a luxury car leasing business. The company offered Lamborghinis, Bentleys, and Range Rovers to high-profile clients, celebrities, influencers, and footballers. But the real business was in the floors beneath. Velvet Motors was a front for drug storage, money laundering, and meeting zones for Tobias's growing network. He had built a team during his time in Spain and expanded it locally with recruits from gyms, clubs, and boxing circuits. Everyone had a job. Some transported packages in modified vehicles. Others handled logistics and encrypted communications. Tobias never carried drugs himself, never touched weapons, and never used his real phone. He operated like a CEO, detached, invisible, and terrifyingly efficient. Leonard Royce remained unaware. Or perhaps he chose to believe the version of his son that he wanted to see. A young man who had matured, reformed, and come back to rebuild his life. The retired officer visited the showroom occasionally, proud that his son had found honest success. Tobias always welcomed him warmly, made coffee, and talked about plans to open a second branch. It was a carefully managed illusion, and Leonard, with all his years of detective work, never questioned it. In reality, Tobias was already trafficking thousands of kilograms of cocaine into the UK through shipping routes he'd mapped while abroad. His empire was taking shape quietly, efficiently, and without blood, yet. He had learned from the mistakes of street gangs and impulsive kingpins. He would not be loud, he would not be seen, and he would not be stopped. The son of one of Britain's most respected police officers was now building the very kind of empire his father had spent his life trying to destroy. And no one, not even Leonard himself, had any idea just how deep Tobias had already gone. Tobias Royce didn't need violence to gain power. He used precision. The success of his operation depended on planning, trust, and ruthless attention to detail. While most criminal networks suffered from chaos, ego, and infighting, Tobias ran his empire like a corporation. He didn't yell or threaten. He made quiet decisions and built a system that didn't depend on fear, but on reward and efficiency. By 25, his organization stretched from Manchester to Glasgow, with branches operating under different guises. Car businesses, storage units, shell import companies. Each piece served a purpose, and none could be traced directly to him. His flagship front, Velvet Motors, was a masterpiece of deception. On the surface, it was a sleek and legitimate business. It had expensive cars, celebrity endorsements, and high-end clients. The building featured glass walls, designer furniture, and security guards in polished uniforms. But underneath, the basement was converted into a control center. A server room hosted encrypted drives. A vault held emergency cash. Surveillance monitors tracked drop locations and delivery routes in real time. The business ran 2 sets of books, one for tax officials and one for Tobias's inner circle. To handle distribution, he built a network of regional managers. Each managed a portion of the UK and was responsible for recruiting local couriers, storing product, and laundering profits. Tobias rarely met these people in person. They were trained to never speak his name and used secure messaging apps for contact. If anyone failed or compromised a shipment, they were replaced, quietly and without fuss. He didn't need to make examples. The reward of being part of his network was enough to keep people loyal. He paid generously, protected those who followed his rules, and cut off anyone who didn't. The drugs themselves came in through shipments labeled as electronics and machinery. Tobias used Spanish suppliers with connection to South American cartels. The cocaine arrived in ports hidden inside engines, washing machines, or sealed within lead casings. Each batch was tested, repackaged, and moved out within 24 hours. He had designed his logistics to minimize risk, never storing large amounts in one place, never letting one person handle too many steps. Even if one part was exposed, the rest could survive. Tobias also knew the importance of image. He curated a public persona that made him look like a rising entrepreneur. He sponsored youth boxing clubs, made donations to local schools, and attended charity events dressed in tailored suits. He even appeared in online interviews, giving vague motivational speeches about second chances and making your own lane. People believed he was a reformed rebel, a young man turning his life around. No one looked deeper. To clean his profits, he purchased dying pubs and laundromats in northern towns. These businesses rarely drew attention and handled just enough cash flow to justify deposits. He also started a fake cryptocurrency company that sold worthless tokens to associates as part of an internal laundering system. Money moved between accounts in Belize, Cyprus, and Dubai, finally landing back in the UK as investment returns. It was nearly impossible to track without a mole inside. But even perfect systems develop cracks. In mid-2024, a spike in overdose deaths caught the attention of local law enforcement in Leeds. Autopsies revealed abnormally pure cocaine, far stronger than street-level users were used to. At the same time, violence began to rise as smaller gangs fought over new supply routes. Something had changed. The streets weren't dealing scraps anymore. They were flooded with high-grade product. The National Crime Agency, NCA, quietly launched Operation Meridian, a task force dedicated to tracking the source of this new surge. Analysts connected the dots between recent shipments, financial inconsistencies, and unusual traffic around certain warehouses. The name, Velvet Motors, popped up more than once, but nothing concrete tied the business to drugs. Still, investigators flagged the business for discreet monitoring. Meanwhile, Tobias remained calm. He knew law enforcement procedures, had studied surveillance patterns, and frequently changed his routines. His inner circle consisted of people he had watched and tested for years. Each man and woman had a role, and none of them, he believed, had a reason to betray him. The operation was scaling up. A new shipment worth over $415 million was already en route. Tobias wanted to go bigger, faster, and cleaner. He had no idea that the first thread of his empire had already begun to unravel from inside his own crew. And he didn't yet know about the mole who had slipped past his filters, someone who was preparing to bring the entire operation down from within. The quiet collapse of Tobias Royce's empire began with a mistake no one noticed at first. A petty drug dealer in Bristol caught with unusually pure cocaine and a bundle of marked notes. The man, desperate to avoid jail, offered a list of names and locations. Most led nowhere. But one name stood out to investigators: Marcus Flint. On paper, Flint was a delivery driver for a meat distribution company. In reality, he was a courier in Tobias's network, trusted with moving large amounts of cash and narcotics across city lines. The National Crime Agency decided to make a move. Flint was arrested during a routine traffic stop, and after hours of pressure, he cracked. He didn't know who the boss was, but he knew there was something big happening. He told investigators about encrypted instructions, isolated handovers, and secret codes. More importantly, he agreed to work undercover. The NCA had their first real lead into Tobias's operation. Marcus Flint was carefully reinserted into the network, claiming he had served short time for an unrelated charge. The story held. Tobias's regional managers believed it, and so did his enforcers. Within weeks, Flint resumed his courier duties, now under the NCA surveillance. He wore a GPS tracker and a recording device embedded in the stitching of his belt. His job was to gain deeper access. Not just deliveries, but meetings, strategy sessions, and identities of key players. Flint proved effective. Over the next 2 months, he provided information about safe houses in Nottingham, money collection hubs in Birmingham, and storage units near Glasgow. Each detail gave investigators a clearer picture of the scale and structure of Tobias's network. Still, Tobias himself remained a ghost. No fingerprints, no digital records, and no voice on any of the intercepted calls. He was running an empire in silence. Then came a breakthrough. Tobias trusted Flint enough to assign him to a critical job. A delivery that was part of a massive upcoming shipment dubbed the Super Run. This operation would move over 15 million worth of cocaine into the country through newly acquired airstrip, using small planes and modified farm equipment to mask the cargo. The plan was risky, but if successful, it would establish a route immune to conventional port inspections. Flint attended a private meeting at a countryside estate where the plan was discussed. Though Tobias wasn't physically present, his second-in-command delivered the full logistics. Flint's hidden device captured everything. The NCA now had enough evidence to justify launching coordinated surveillance on Velvet Motors' key drop sites and Tobias's suspected inner circle. A takedown was in sight. But Tobias had learned not to trust consistency. He frequently rotated staff, changed security protocols, and had a team that monitored the movements of his own employees. One of these internal watchers, a paranoid ex-military man named Heston, noticed something strange. Flint had started taking odd routes, arriving too early and showing nervous behavior during drops. Suspicion turned into investigation, and Tobias ordered a quiet background check. Within days, the truth surfaced. Flint's real arrest hadn't been a coincidence. Surveillance footage from the arrest, overlooked by police, had made its way to Tobias's analyst team. They connected the dots. Flint had flipped. There was no dramatic confrontation, no warning. Flint disappeared during what was supposed to be a routine delivery in Sheffield. His car was later found abandoned near a reservoir. Inside were torn seat cushions and a glove with blood on it. No body was recovered, but the message was clear: Tobias had discovered the mole. The NCA was stunned. Losing Flint meant losing a direct feed into the heart of the operation. Worse, Tobias now knew he was being hunted. But instead of fleeing or dismantling his empire, Tobias doubled down. He changed all channels of communication. He cleared out safe houses, moved product, and shut down non-essential hubs. He launched a full internal audit of his team, eliminating anyone who posed a threat. The Super Run was postponed indefinitely, but Tobias remained in control. He sent out a final signal. Anyone cooperating with police would face consequences. The NCA, frustrated and desperate, accelerated their efforts. Tobias Royce had slipped through their fingers once, but they knew the clock was ticking. Every day he remained free. More drugs hit the streets, and more lives were at risk. What they didn't know was that Tobias had already prepared a final escape plan. A silent exit built over years, hidden behind layers of fake names and foreign passports. The empire might be compromised, but the king had no intention of going down with it. The raid on Velvet Motors began just before dawn, timed to catch everyone off guard. Dozens of officers from the National Crime Agency stormed the property in synchronized formation. entering through both the front and rear exits. Flashbangs cracked against the garage doors as armed units rushed in. What they found inside didn't resemble a criminal hideout. It looked like a luxury showroom. Polished floors reflected overhead lights. Sports cars sat gleaming under display lamps, and the faint smell of expensive cologne hung in the air. But beneath the glamour, the real story unraveled. In the underground basement, hidden behind a magnetic panel in the office, officers discovered a fortified control room. Multiple screens displayed live security feeds from sites across the country. Warehouses, storage units, and courier checkpoints. Encrypted drives, satellite phones, and surveillance maps lined the walls. In a locked drawer, they uncovered a binder with coded ledgers, listing drop times, product weight, and payment logs. The evidence was overwhelming, but the one thing missing was Tobias Royce. Simultaneously, other teams raided properties linked to Tobias. In Cheshire, a farmhouse converted into a safe house was emptied. It contained trapdoors beneath the kitchen, leading to steel containers buried underground. Inside were sealed packages of cocaine, cash in vacuum-packed bricks, and more encrypted mobile devices. A second property in Leeds revealed luxury watches, crypto wallets, and burner passports under various names. The assets showed how global Tobias's operation had become. But again, no Tobias. Investigators feared the worst. With the network exposed, he may have fled the country. He had access to private airstrips, offshore bank accounts, and false identities. Surveillance on ports and airports was ramped up. His known associates were monitored, and his family was questioned. Yet Tobias had vanished without a trace. 3 weeks passed. Then, a faint signal changed everything. One of the trackers embedded into the vehicles used by Tobias's couriers began transmitting from an abandoned train depot on the outskirts of Liverpool. The location was odd, decrepit, silent, and long forgotten. When authorities arrived, they found what looked like an old shipping container tucked behind rusted fencing and overgrown weeds. Inside, the surprise left even seasoned agents speechless. Tobias Royce was sitting alone, legs crossed, wearing a designer sweater and polished shoes. Around him were high-end liquor bottles, a luxury speaker softly playing jazz, and a single newspaper with his own face on the cover. He didn't resist. He didn't run. He simply stood, hands in the air, and smiled as he was handcuffed. The man who had outwitted authorities for years surrendered like he had planned it. Back at NCA headquarters, Tobias was processed and interrogated, but he offered nothing. No names, no explanations. He remained silent through hours of questioning, staring ahead, occasionally tilting his head as if listening to something only he could hear. His calm demeanor unsettled the agents. This wasn't a man broken by arrest. He looked like someone waiting for a delayed flight, patient, detached, and unconcerned. While Tobias said nothing, his seized files spoke volumes. The ledgers uncovered detailed every shipment for the last 4 years. Dates, weights, destinations, and revenue. Over 135 million had been moved through his operation. Dozens of accomplices were named in code, but the NCA cracked them quickly, leading to a new wave of arrests. Velvet Motors was permanently shut down and its assets seized. Tobias's name became headline material across the UK, dubbed the Ghost Kingpin by tabloids. But there was still confusion surrounding his surrender. Analysts wondered if he had allowed himself to be found. The shipping container had food, power, water, and high-speed internet. It wasn't a hiding place. It was a controlled space. Some believed he had sensed the walls closing in and decided to end the game on his own terms. Despite his capture, Tobias remained a puzzle. He didn't seem afraid. He didn't appear angry. If anything, he seemed relieved. A man who had lived years in the shadows now sat under bright lights without blinking. Prosecutors prepared for trial, confident in their evidence. The public wanted justice, but buried beneath all the headlines and case files was a single, unanswered question. Why did he let them find him? And the truth, as it would later turn out, was far more personal and far more disturbing than anyone imagined. Tobias Royce's trial became one of the most high-profile court cases in modern British criminal history. Reporters lined up outside the courthouse, photographers swarmed, and news stations broadcast live coverage as the man once believed to be a reformed entrepreneur faced the consequences of running a $135 million drug empire. The courtroom was packed with police officials, former associates, victims' families, and a curious public eager to witness the downfall of a criminal mastermind. And sitting in the gallery, face expressionless and shoulders tight, was retired Chief Superintendent Leonard Royce, Tobias's father. As prosecutors presented the evidence, the room listened in silence. They described the sophisticated supply routes, the coded ledgers, and the global financial laundering network Tobias had engineered. They played footage from the surveillance raids and revealed intercepted messages linking his couriers to the international cartel. The jury watched in disbelief as each new layer was peeled back. The scale, the planning, and the cold efficiency of the operation shocked even seasoned investigators. Throughout the trial, Tobias remained calm, refusing to testify, never reacting. He sat still, hands folded, eyes forward. His legal team, paid in full from a mysterious trust account, attempted to cast doubt on the prosecution's timeline and chain of custody, but the evidence was overwhelming. Witnesses, many of whom were arrested mid-operation, had flipped in exchange for leniency. They testified about Tobias's leadership style, his rewards for loyalty, and his quiet threats against betrayal. One called him the most polite criminal I've ever worked for, until he vanished people. Then came the twist no one saw coming. During a recess, the prosecution submitted a series of newly uncovered financial records. A forensic audit of Tobias's seized devices had led investigators to an offshore account registered in the Cayman Islands. That account had been opened 18 years ago and listed Leonard Royce as the sole beneficiary. At first, it was assumed to be an error, but as analysts dug deeper, more connections emerged. Monthly deposits in the thousands, all traced back to various shell companies linked to Tobias's empire. In total, nearly 400 zloty had been funneled to Leonard over the years. The courtroom buzzed with shock. Tobias's father, the former chief superintendent celebrated for fighting crime, was now suspected of being on his own son's secret payroll. When asked to explain the deposits, Leonard claimed they were inheritance funds from a family estate. But no such estate existed. Under intense pressure, the retired officer's own history was examined, and troubling inconsistencies began to appear in his old case files. Several drug arrests from the 1990s, all part of Leonard's key operations, showed signs of tampering. Confessions were missing, evidence logs had gaps, and witnesses had recanted under unusual circumstances. Investigators now faced the possibility that Tobias's criminal rise hadn't happened despite his father's past, but because of it. The question now shifted from, how did Tobias fool everyone? To, was his father helping him all along? But the full story never came to light. Just 2 days before Leonard Royce was scheduled to testify, he was found dead in his home, collapsed in his armchair, clutching a photo of his son as a child. The coroner ruled it a heart attack. There was no foul play. But the timing cast a dark shadow over the trial. With Leonard's death, any chance of confirming or denying his involvement died too. Tobias didn't flinch at the news. He sat through the remaining court sessions with the same empty stare, his expression never cracking. When the verdict came, it was unanimous. Guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. No appeal was filed. No final statement was given. But even as Tobias was locked away in a high-security facility, rumors persisted. Several million pounds from his empire remained unaccounted for. A handful of his closest lieutenants were never found, and cryptic messages began surfacing online, hinting at unfinished business. Some believed Tobias had hidden more than money, possibly names, possibly leverage. In the end, Tobias Royce became more than a criminal. He became a symbol of how power can hide in plain sight, protected by the illusion of legitimacy and a family name once trusted by the nation. A drug kingpin raised by a cop. A son who studied his father's playbook and rewrote it for crime. And a final truth that would never be fully known.